Hello, I'm Tamanna Inamdar and you've tuned into Your Money, your ultimate guide to savings and investments. Well, choosing the right investment has become quite a task. There is a slew of products out there, and if you are trying to work your way through the maze, you have tuned into the right show. We're going to talk about investment strategies today. We have with us Karthik Zaveri, Director of Transcend Consulting. Karthik, a very good evening to you. Welcome to the show. First off, I would just like to ask you, do you think there is adequate information out there for people to make the right investment decisions? Because we're always hearing of people buying into mutual fund schemes and insurance policies and half the time not knowing what they've really bought.
Right, you're right on that note. There is a lot of information available. In fact, it's an explosion of information with the slew of IPOs that are being released by mutual funds and the new innovative products that are launched by insurance companies, etc. What happens in this thing is that an investor tends to get lost in the maze because then he's not exactly sure what's the best investment product for him. Now, that's where it comes in, a very seasoned advisor who can actually identify and tell you that, look, this is the best thing for you and this is the best strategy you must do. This is how you must do your asset allocation, because the interesting thing is it's becoming easier now to earn money, but it becomes that much more complicated to deploy that money in investments.
Good point there, and that's also where we come in. We're going to tell you in the show where exactly you can put your money. Asking us that question first off is Rikil Shah on the line from Ahmedabad. He's a 24-year-old businessman. Rikil, do you find it difficult to choose the right investment strategy?
Yeah, I am finding a bit difficult on this at this level of the market.
What kind of investment are you looking at?
Yeah, I am looking for long-term horizon for mutual funds because we do not have adequate information and time to research the specific stocks and all that.
Okay.
So the right way is to going through the mutual funds.
Okay, so you like the mutual fund investments. How much money are you looking to invest at this point in time?
Yeah, at this point I like to invest 1.5 lakh rupees.
1.5 lakh rupees. You already have some mutual fund investments, or this would be your first?
Yeah, I do have 1 year. Certainly 1 year back I do not believe in the investment in mutual funds. But one of my friend has advised me, and I have invested in Reliance Growth Fund Growth Plan.
Okay.
Growth option. So I make quite a lot of money in that particular scheme.
Okay, that's always nice to hear. Nice to talk to people who made a lot of money. 1.5 lakhs is what he's got. He wants to put in money. He's saying the Sensex is teasing 6,800. Should I put in equity MFs at this time? But let me add to that question. A lot of mutual fund new schemes, they call them IPOs, they're not allowed to anymore. But is that something which is attractive? Because there's a lot of debate on whether you should put money in IPOs, mutual fund IPOs at this point in time.
Right, okay. There are 2-3 things that have come out here. One is, the first thing I'd like to say is he's got a long-term horizon, so which is a great thing. Second, he wants to do mutual fund investing in equity rather than direct stocks, which is also a very, very financially prudent decision to do. Now, where you mention, whether you should time the market, should you enter at this levels? Well, a very simple answer to that is you don't ever know what is the right level. You might want to wait for 6,000. What if the market goes down to 5,000 or 5,500? On the other hand, what if it went the other way? What if it went up? So it's a little difficult to put an exact tab on when you should enter. But what I would say is, where you got 1.5 lakhs, you should start putting that 1.5 lakh by taking a small amount of exposure. Say you could choose a liquid or an MIP with 5 or 10% equity exposure, and then slowly and steadily over a period of time, exactly like the way an SIP works, do something like an STP, a systematic transfer plan, and get your money into equity funds over a period of time. So that will not make you lose out if the market went up, and at the same time if the market went down you'll be pretty well shielded. So that should be a good way to proceed. And the last thing that you mentioned about the IPOs, Tamanna. Now what happens with these IPOs is there's a lot of hype created, and SEBI has appropriately gunned this down and saying that it should not be an IPO but should be a new public offering. Now what happens here, it is very different, unlike a stock investment, because there you're talking about a single stock, and here you're talking about a basket of stocks, which is a mutual fund IPO. And from the time that the mutual fund IPO has closed to the time it actually releases, what might happen is if the market goes down, people tend to lose a lot of money. So it's not exactly identical like an equity stock IPO. A mutual fund initial offering is very, very different.
Right. What about equity linked saving schemes? What's your take on that one?
Equity linked saving schemes are another very, very beautiful option. They've been consistently performing over the last few years. and will do so because there are a lot of inherent advantages there, because the fund manager is not under pressure. He can take a long-term call. Investors have to have a lock-in of 3 years minimum.
Right,
At the
Mr.
same
Zaveri,
time,
I'm going to stop you there because a lot happening on the political front as of now. We're going to cut in live to a BJP meet where Party Vice President Venkaiah Naidu is addressing the media. He's talking about LK Advani taking back his resignation. Okay, we'll get to that in a bit, but before that, let's take on our next question. That is something brewing up there and we have our eye on it. But let's see what Rohit Mathur wants to know. He writes to us from Bangalore. He wants to know the meaning of annualized returns and also how is it different from absolute returns. Ketan?
Okay. This is a good question actually. Let's make it very simple. Say you invested 100 rupees and over a 6-month period this became 110 rupees. So the return that you've got is basically 10%. Now that's, in very simple terms, absolute return for you. It's the amount of money that you've made from the time you invested. Now mutual funds normally tend to publish an absolute return for schemes that have run for less than 1 year, or if they want to show a comparison of how a scheme is done in the last 3 months or 6 months or something like that. Coming to annualized, what annualized does is it's more or less like a conversion to an annualized basis, to an annual basis. So what happens is you can compare effectively between one fund to the other fund. It is a very good estimate because that's the estimate one should be using. Let's say, to give you another simple example, if you invested 100 rupees and say in 2 years time it became 132, assuming that you were getting a 15% return. Then what that means is that you have got a 15% compounded return for the 2 years, because different years could give you different returns. But if you want to say, how is the scheme done in terms of giving me a compounded rate of return, then that's the way you look at it, by looking at the annualized return.
Right, just taking forward what we were talking about mutual funds earlier, we've seen sectoral funds being a big hit last year or so. Do you think there's still something people should put their money in right now, because diversified funds are sort of taking their place on top of the list?
Right. What happens with sectoral funds, Tamanna, is that they are the highest, shall we say, level of equity risk investing. So it depends on the business cycles. So from time to time it changes. There could be a business cycle when auto and auto ancillary and maybe pharmaceuticals are doing well. In the next business cycle they may not do so well, and which is what we saw with a lot of IT oriented funds during the time of 2000 and 2001, and then they crashed drastically. So if one has to be safe and one wants to take a long-term call, then a diversified fund is a better idea. In a short-term basis, if you want to take a very high level of risk, then maybe you could consider sectoral funds as well.
Okay, let's talk to our next caller. 22-year-old Devang Shukla is calling us from Amreli, Gujarat. Devang, welcome to the show.
Oh, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. How are you?
I am.
Okay, what's your question for us?
I want to invest up to 10,000 per year in a mutual fund.
Okay.
So should put 10,000 in balance fund. I put 50% in equity and in debt instruments.
Okay, should he break up that 10,000 in equity and debt is what his question is. For someone investing 10,000, would you say an SIP route works, or is it too small an amount to go in for an SIP?
10,000 is on an annual basis, if I'm correct.
Right.
That's what you said, right?
Right, he is talking about an annual basis.
Right, okay. So if it's an annual basis, yes, then you can't really do an SIP, because the minimum investment in an SIP is 500 in some schemes, which is kind of going out. Mostly it's going to be about 1,000 rupees a month. What I would say is, I think you're on the right lines where you're saying that you should invest in two separate schemes, one being equity and one being debt. If you want to do a 50-50 equity and debt, maybe you could choose two different funds, and over a period of time, at the end of say 1 year or so, you look at it and maybe reallocate your portfolio so that you're more or less at the same level of asset allocation, that is 50-50 as you desire.
Okay, but would you say debt is really something one should invest in right now? Dismal returns at best in the last couple of years. A new investment in debt right now would be a good idea?
Right. See, what happens with debt is it's more driven by the kind of risk tolerance capability that one individual has. So if I do not want to take a call more than 50 or 60% into equity, then with the remaining amount, if I have to invest in a mutual fund, then the best option is to maybe go into a debt fund, and within a debt fund, maybe look at a floating rate fund, which does not, which is a little bit, so to say, shielded from the volatility of interest rates.
Okay, we slip into a break now, but Karthik Zaveri stays on to answer more queries. Don't go away. Welcome back to Your Money. We're talking about saving, investments and strategies today. Next online with us is Nidhi Nagendra. Nidhi, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. What about you?
I'm fine. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Bhopal.
Okay. Nidhi, what can we do for you and how do you plan? I see here you're a freelancer. Does that make it even more difficult to plan investments?
No, that's not, but I'm basically concerned about my husband's tax saving options. Means my basic concern is how can I plan my investment so as to get the maximum tax advantage? Means what are the various tax saving options for me?
Tax advantage for you or for your husband?
For my husband, obviously.
Okay.
And the second question is that my husband is getting fee, not the salary. He is acting a consultant to a NGO, international NGO. So what he is getting is a fee. So what are the various tax dimension if my husband is getting a fee?
Okay, so she wants to save or invest from solely the purpose of saving tax. Karthik, how can we help her? And first off, any investments she makes, will they give any kind of tax benefit to her husband?
No. That wouldn't happen. Her husband would have to make investments out of his own earnings, and that's the only way you can get a tax break onto your investments, into your savings. Let's look at the second part first. I mean, what other things she can do besides this tax saving? She did mention something about that, and given that her husband is getting a fee, a consulting fee, and not really a salary, there are other advantages that he gets as a business person, which is things like depreciation and if he has staff salaries and things like that, which he can offset from his business income, because this is exactly a business income and not really a salary that he's getting. Now let's say, Nidhi, coming to your question of how can he save his taxes, according to the new section 80C, he's going to be able to invest 1 lakh into a variety of instruments, which is going to give him almost 30,000 rupees of tax breaks. These instruments effectively are your ELSS and your LIC policies and your pension policies, etc. But there are two things that you need to consider when you actually set out to start this kind of an investment strategy for your husband. One is you need to look at the kind of instruments that you are going to take, and are you going to be comfortable with the kind of risk these instruments will have inherent in them, right? Because there is one angle of taxation. Some instruments like infrastructure bonds and NSE are not so much tax friendly now, because you'll have to pay tax. The interest that you get from that will be added to your income, though you get a tax break on the face of it. So then the choice remains into going to instruments such as equity linked saving schemes, unit linked insurance plans, insurance policies, etc. So that's one choice that you first need to make. And the second thing is, we're not very sure about the kind of taxation that's going to happen on insurance and PPF funds, because we're talking about something called EET regime. It's going to come in shortly. There's a committee who's working on that. So my guess is that by the next financial year or so, there would be some announcements regarding a taxation on PPF.
But that's something a lot of viewers talk about or ask us about. An EET regime, wouldn't it be from a prospective effect and not a retrospective effect? If someone is planning to make investments now or today, should they be worrying about it?
See, Tamanna, what happens is, though it's going to happen prospectively, it's like this: your insurance funds and your PPF policies are effectively very long-term policies, or long-term instruments, shall we say. It's about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So what happens if the government says that whatever funds you will get on redemption, you might have to pay, say, a 10% or a 15% or some marginal tax on that? We're not really sure. It can, go both ways. You could have some kind of a tax break coming only on the funds that you will make investments, say, 1st April 2006. So it could go either ways. What I'm saying here is not to invest, but go a little easy into these investments, because there are alternative options which give you better yields and which are a part of the same 80C section, under which you're going to get an exemption for 1 lakh of your investments.
Right. One more interesting thing, Ketan, is that both of them are, I wouldn't say freelancers, but they're not salaried employees. That means they don't have a specific amount of money coming in every month. Is there a need for a different kind of savings planning and investment planning for such people?
What they can do is, again, a lot of this revolves around the kind of instruments they choose. Let us, for example, choose that they chose an equity linked savings scheme. Now that's obviously a risky proposition. Now if they had to do that, they're not going to be able to do on an SIP on a monthly basis. They can do it on a quarterly basis or a triannual basis. Over a period of time, what happens is the volatility eases out. As long as you know that this is a long-term investment and you have to have a time frame of at least about 5-7 years, you should be perfectly okay. If you're talking about other instruments